Hello, everyone. I'm Janet Salmons, Methods Guru for Sage Methodspace, and I'm joined here today by Zizi Papacharissi, who is the editor for the journal Social Media and Society. And we're going to have a conversation about research relevance and how this journal is responding to the current challenges. But first, if you are new to Methodspace, we are a blog community sponsored by Sage Publishing. We're interested in all things to do with designing, planning, conducting research, writing about it, sharing results in all different kinds of ways. And you can see at the center of this Venn diagram, we have teaching and learning, because we feel that whether you are a new researcher or an experienced researcher, we all have something to learn. So we like to have some opportunities for exchange like we're doing here today. So Zizi, why don't you start by just telling us a little bit about the journal, your readership and your goals and what you're all about.
Sure, it'd be my pleasure, and thank you for having me on. We started Social Media and Society as a little bit of an experiment. I should begin by saying that I've never been a huge fan of the term social media. I find that it's very overused. I find that it creates unfair categories in terms of how we think about media. It also ascribes the label social to a set of platforms that often, if not used with a sense of balance and with a sense of purpose, can have very antisocial consequences. And it also, generally tends to create this false divide between let's say media like Facebook, Twitter that are termed social, and then other perhaps more old school media like the telephone that in my mind afford much more socially oriented and motivated communication. So when I set up the journal and I set up the goals and the trajectory for the journal, it was essential for me to explain that when we say social media, we refer to, yes, of course, platforms, technology facilitated platforms that afford sociality, but we also extend that to all kinds of communication media that are rendered social by how they are being put used to by how they're being put to use by individuals, by people. So we're very open-minded in terms of how we define social media, and we're very open-minded and open-ended in terms of the methods that that we invite and that we want to explore. We came into being during a time of theoretical and I think methodological renaissance in the social sciences, and our goal was very much to be part of that and to invite more of that theoretical and methodological reimagining and refashioning.
Well, that's a terrific start, and I think we could have a long conversation about the term social media and social networking. The really what the exchange is all about. But here, for our focus today, I want to build on those ideas and think about the theme we're exploring this year is research relevance. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what your readers and what your contributing researchers are most concerned about at this time. What kinds of problems are they interested in studying and discussing? For example, do we see more interest in the big data side of the very large scale, or kind of looking at the more particular kinds of exchanges? And then how are they approaching those kinds of problems?
Yeah, there's some trends that are massive right now, and they reflect a lot of the tendencies and tensions that we are living through in society. The first one has to do with the infrastructure of truth and the role of propaganda. So we see a lot of interest in misinformation, disinformation, and tactics that support that, both in terms of what readers want to have access to and also the kinds of submissions that we receive. We also have a number of submissions and a lot of interest in the pandemic and how that's being dealt with. And the challenge here, of course, is that methodologically, it's very difficult to do something on the pandemic that is beyond the descriptive, describing trends, describing the experience, because we're still going through it. And research and interpretation, they take a little bit of time. And there's countless other trends, but a last one I want to highlight is this whole idea of data justice and representation. So there's a whole lot of interest, both in terms of the submissions, but in terms of what's being read on how technologies are reading identity and misunderstanding identity in terms of race, class, gender, or race, ethnicity, class, and gender, and then sort of what sort of opportunities platforms afford for expanding, moving beyond the very narrow trajectories or the binaries that platforms afford for identity expression. And then the methods sort of go hand in hand, something to keep in mind. It's always been the case with new media. We have to borrow a little bit of the old and then adjust it, apply to the new. That's something I've been studying new media for nearly 25 years now, and I've frequently found myself in the position of going back to the classics and then finding some way to apply those to the new media plateau, so that I can figure out how I'm going to sample on TikTok, for instance.
Right. So are you finding interest in qualitative, quantitative, how do those methodologies play out with your researchers?
I would say that most of the manuscripts that end up faring well and getting published in Social Media and Society employ a mixed methods approach. And that's quickly developing to be the canonical approach in communication and in the social sciences. So gone are the days where, or semi-gone are the days where we might present something that was strictly quantitative or strictly qualitative, and arrive to some conclusions based on that approach. Most authors find that mixing qualitative elements into a quantitative approach, or just really directly creating a hybrid approach that combines the qualitative and the quantitative understanding, yields results that have greater reliability and that have greater validity. And those are two constructs that are essential and have been essential to researchers who've been doing social science work, who've been doing science work forever.
Right. I think that's really important, especially when looking at the social media, where we have such large quantities of information, but what's the story behind it? Without that, it's hard to get the context or the meaning. So another question I have for you is, I think ties directly into your comments about the fight against disinformation and misinformation and intentional straight out lies. And I think, on our side, we want to say, well, to the public and to the world, you can trust us because we have a rigorous peer review process. We have a rigorous disciplined approach to research, to empirical study. And we have a way to get our work out there where we have multiple sets of eyes who are going to take a careful look. At the same time, that takes a long time to do. And so, especially at a point that we're in now where, there's some amount of urgency to gain some new understandings with some of the critical challenges that we're facing, what, for Social Media and Society as a journal and your efforts around that, are there ideas that you have about either trying to expedite the review process or to use social media, blogs, other kinds of, or editorials, opinion pieces, essays, to get ideas out there kind of while the research maybe is still underway, or while the review process is underway, to somehow, balance those two needs?
It's an excellent question. From the beginning, we were vested in making social media and society a very public-facing journal, and affording the manuscripts that we publish research relevance, and doing what we can to augment, to amplify that research relevance. Now, of course, we have the understanding that often research, especially research that's not only relevant but has a very long shelf life, takes some time to conduct. So one direction that we pursued, which has been very meaningful for us and also for our readers, is something that we call the 2K approach. So we started a separate section of the journal that's called 2K, not for the famous 2K anticipated failure of all computers, but rather to indicate that all pieces submitted need to be no more than 2,000 words. So we use that particular section of the journal to play with ideas and to get thoughts out there that are still in the making. And they cover many of the very important issues that you named. We ran a special issue that was focused on the pandemic, very early in the pandemic, and we kept those pieces short, under 2,000 words, specifically because we wanted to communicate to the public. We wanted to get some thoughts out there based on what we know about pandemics, what we know about epidemiology, what we know about how information spreads, what we know about insecurity and public health. But at the same time, we wanted to realize that, this is something that's happening, that's unfolding. So we also need to take some time to study it more carefully. We did the same thing for elections when we wanted to focus on the infrastructure of the truth. We did something similar when we wanted to lay out the intellectual scope of the journal. So we published a manifesto issue. I think those kinds of opportunities to publish shorter pieces are key, are essential, and they connect us to the public. They're also very, they're structured, they're written to be very approachable, very reader friendly. They're not meant to be dense, although they're certainly very thoughtful, and they come from scholars who are very learned and very well versed in what they're talking about. But they are written with that idea of being of relevance, of making research relevant. So there's the business of publishing the scholarly article that's going to get you the citation, and we're certainly in that business. But then there's also the task of being a public intellectual, of being relevant in today's society. And that's then what this other arm of the journal has been crafted to curate.
And as an open access journal, you have a real opportunity for that to get those out, and we'll highlight some of those shorter pieces so our readers can see some examples. So looking ahead to this coming year, we're off to a little bit of a bumpy start. So what kinds of special issues or editorial focus might you discuss to give people a little preview of what they can find in the journal this year?
Of course. Well, we have a number of special issues that are coming out, and they're focused on misinformation, and they're also focused on digital labor practices. But what I would love to see more of that we haven't done is an issue that's focused on social robotics, because those also make for social media. And I'd love to eventually do a more extensive, more thoughtful issue on social media and the pandemic, social media and epidemiology. That said, and if I'm given the opportunity to have more time, if we all somehow magically get more hours in the day,
Right.
I would love to play around with other formats. So I would love to have very short vlog interviews with some of our authors. And I would also like to, along the lines of the project that you're working on, um, I'm thinking about a feature that's focused on research stories, where we invite scholars to tell a research story. So that's focused around a problem, research problem that they decided to investigate, but tells the obstacles and the travails
Right.
and the failures and the successes. So, and obviously this can be a very long conversation that goes on for hours, but I would ask someone to just pick one study and just walk us through all the different
Right.
methodological mishaps that
Right.
happened,
Right.
and how the eventually those turned into a success in the sense that the article was eventually published. I think people enjoy listening to those, at least in my classes they
Right.
do, and I think there would be an
No.
audience for those out there.
I think that that's very important. I mean, SAGE has the SAGE research cases, and those similarly, have the tact of kind of telling the backstory, because I think, especially as a new researcher or maybe an experienced researcher trying to do something different than what they've done before, which pretty much everyone has now had to do since many doors are closed after with the pandemic. I have a whole shelf full of books, and this one's about data collection, and this one's about analysis, interpretation, all these different things. Well, you've got to pull all of that together, and that's very challenging. And maybe you've got to do it, together with co-researchers who are, and people, your participants, or the research site, whether that is an online community um, or something, face to face. So, hearing how people did it, how they pulled those things together, and what you did when you thought for sure these people were going to participate in the interview and give you what you needed to learn, but either they don't show up or they really don't have that much to say. I mean, what do you do next? So I think that would be a great idea. So is there anything else you would like to add for people who might want to contribute to the journal?
Well, I would say to take a look at what we've published in the past, look at some of our special issues to get a sense for what we're interested in, where we're headed, and look at our editorial board to because that's a wonderful way to get a sense for the mood of the journal, for the sense of the journal, for the aspirations of the journal. But I would invite people again to sort of think a little bit think about what's going on now, of course, but think about the future, think about the unexpected, and broaden out their understandings of what we call social media, and think about interfaces of the future. Because what we use now is very popular, but it's all going to be gone in 5 years and will be moved on to different platforms. So I'd love to start publishing some scholarship on that as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much for telling us more about the journal, and I hope that viewers will take a look at some of the related posts we'll put online on Methodspace to highlight some of your special issues and some of the different features of the journal. So thanks so much for
thank you for your time. Thank you for the wonderful questions. It's a pleasure.